Hello, my History 125 students. This is Professor Donald Earl Collins talking to you about week 3 and things that we need to talk about regarding week 2 and week 4 moving forward. So, hi. Just a few things covering this previous week, this week, and a little bit about next week as well because you have a sourcing assignment due at the end of week 4. Anyway. First, real quick with week 2. Most of you did anywhere between pretty decently and very well. The thing to say is that you only had one reading in multiple parts, the Brodell reading, so there's that, and there's that reality around it. I did do a video recording talking to you about the fact that don't get so focused on Europe and what Europe did during the period and what Brodell's saying regarding Europe that you really forget about the fact that this is still the Middle Ages in Europe, and Europe is still lagging behind most of the known world, meaning the rest of the known world being the Eastern Hemisphere, Asia, Africa, the Arab world in particular. They're lagging behind compared to those places. And also don't forget that compared to the classical period, that it's still half Dark Ages, half recovering from Dark Ages regarding the Middle Ages for Europe as well. So when you think about all of that, you have to keep in mind that yes, there are certainly advances made during that period, but Brodell's analysis, you don't want to do such a complete 180 that you forget this is not a period of major technological and scientific innovation for Europe for most of the period between 500 CE and 1350 or even 1400 CE. There's pockets of innovation. There's folks and individuals and groups who come up with stuff that's used in urban areas, somewhat in urban areas, but generally doesn't spread. It's really with the Crusades, with the opening of trade between Western and Central Europe and the Arab world, and through the Arab world with India and China, that really, and that borrowing of technology, borrowing of scientific innovations, cultural diffusion, interdependence and dependence on it, that allows Europe to start to catch up, right? That's not to say that people in Europe weren't doing stuff. It just means that they needed help. They borrowed. They begged. They probably stole in some cases knowledge, technology, um, innovations in order to do that. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. The Arab world borrowed heavily from India and China. The African world borrowed from the Arab world fairly heavily, in addition to what all of those civilizations and all those kingdoms and empires were doing on their own. Nothing wrong with that. So, that's just the reality of it. That's how technology spreads. That's how science has spread throughout the millennia. It's only in the 19th century that we act like people had to do stuff on their own, and as a result of doing stuff on their own, that makes them better than other people. It's only the last 150, 200 years that we've had these Western ideas, and to be honest, they're mostly wrong. So there's that. So enough of week 2. Please look at the announcements if you want more about what to do next. And please read the comments I've been making on your discussion posts and responses over the last 2 weeks. I've commented on almost everybody's posts at some point or time or another, either privately or in the general framework of discussion, whatnot. You also look at what your classmates have posted. A bunch of you have done really good posts. Some of you have done pretty good posts. They're all good examples for what to do when you're in that discussion mode, that online discussion format. So there's that. Week 3 and week 4 are really getting into how Europe in particular really takes off in terms of science and technological innovation. That's what week 3 is mostly all about, right? And week 4 too. So we're covering everything from the scientific method to, optics and the development of, eventually Galileo's telescope. We're covering, excuse me, things like the rise of what eventually will be the scientific revolution by the time we get to week 5. We're also covering, certainly by week 5, certainly, but week 4 in particular too. We're also covering sort of the diffusion of new technologies like the printing press and Ptolemy's map, right? Those are your readings for this week. And again, I must enforce and stress the fact that these things are not taking place in a vacuum. The idea that one man sat back and did all this work and invented something from whole cloth, from nothing to like this great innovation like the movable print and movable type, the printing press. It's kind of ridiculous. Same thing goes with Ptolemy's map, a map that was supposedly invented, or at least the way the Duke sort of um, longitudinal or latitudinal map. I think it's a latitudinal map in 150 CE, and then somehow that made it all the way through. No, I mean those are two examples again of what I've been trying to stress throughout the course, that scientific innovation, technological innovation, inventions, if you will, are not created by one person typically, are not done from whole cloth, and they go through ebbs and flows. It's not linear, it's not continual, it's not, we just build on one thing and get to the next generation and build on another and build on another. If that were the case, there would have been no dark ages in Europe. There would have been pandemics spreading across the known world during the 14th century when people knew some form of germ theory, at least for hundreds of years in India and parts of Southeast Asia and the Arab world, maybe even longer if you consider Chinese medicine as well, but still didn't have the ability to fight major diseases like bubonic plague and smallpox and measles and mumps and the whole 9 yards, right? So, they knew how to do certain things, but they didn't know how to do certain things because they didn't have enough knowledge. So it's not linear, it's not continual. There are ebbs and flows to this thing. And so when we get to talk about using Ptolemy's map as an example, there's a question on there for the week that sort of asks you how to trace how that map, which was originally invented, so to speak, by Ptolemy around 150 CE, so the 2nd century, right in the heart, right at Rome's height of the Roman Empire, the Greco-Roman Empire that happens to include Egypt, because Ptolemy, the inventor, lived in Egypt, lived in Alexandria, Egypt. Greek conquered Egypt, which was subsequently conquered by the Romans, Egypt. So you got Egyptian culture, Greek culture, Roman culture, all mixing together, right? Comes up with a coordinate system to trace essentially as much of the world as could be known by somebody, by a scholar, a Greco-Roman scholar in the middle of Egypt in the middle of the 2nd century. And the map is nowhere near accurate. It's not an accurate map mathematically. It's not an accurate map in terms of how the world actually looks. It's just sort of an approximation. And for what we could tell, the original map did not survive. It didn't survive either because of the fire at the Alexandria Library in the 7th century, or just didn't survive because a lot of things don't survive antiquity. So it was sort of lost. But not his writings about the said map, which were recovered by Arab Muslim scholars in the 8th and 9th century CE. A scholar by the name of Muhammad al-Khwarizmi is the one in the middle of the 9th century who takes the calculations and the notes that Ptolemy left about his map and reworks them. He reworks those things so that they're more accurate and give a more accurate depiction of how to get around the Arab Muslim world, the Arab and African Muslim world, which stretches from Spain and the Iberian Peninsula and Morocco all the way basically to the corners of what we would call Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan. That's a huge amount of territory to cover, and he was able to do that by taking Ptolemy's map and building on it. Al-Khwarizmi, by the way, is also the father of what we call algebra. And algebra, by the way, is an Arab term, which basically means methodology in so many words. A method of creating a series of equations to account for unknown factors in mathematics. He is the father of what we learned in 8th and 9th and 10th and 11th grade. Even the calculus equations that we use now are built on the basis of knowing how to do algebra. And those algebra equations that we now know of today were designed by this man, right? So he's the one that is the link between how we get Ptolemy's map from the 2nd century CE to the 9th century CE, and his work and the work of other Arab Muslim scholars eventually makes its way into the hands of the Byzantines, who then translate it from Arabic to Latin and Greek so that it's distributed to scholars throughout Europe. And those scholars eventually get their hands on that at the beginning of the end of the 14th, beginning of the 15th century, and they work it out so that map makers can spread this throughout Europe, which helps with the age of exploration. Without all of that, Ptolemy's map never makes it in European hands, or toward the end of the Middle Ages and beginning of the early modern period. The age of exploration can't happen. But it takes the work of folks from different parts of the world, not just Ptolemy, to make this happen. So that's just one example. The printing press is another one. Printing press isn't from Gutenberg. Johannes Gutenberg was to come up with it whole cloth. The Chinese had worked on printable type for at least 600 years before that. Their idea spreads to India and to the Arab world. They tried to work it out, but for various reasons, it doesn't really work with language that has 10,000 characters in the form of Chinese, or a language that is more beautiful in calligraphy than it is in movable type, which happens to be Arabic. With 26 letters, it's a little bit easier to do type in Greco-Roman alphabet than it is to do it with these other types. So that's what makes Gutenberg both innovative and not original at the same time. So I just wanted to add that. So that's week 3 in a nutshell. Try to understand both the fact that your readings don't really cover what I just talked about, but understand that that's the context behind what's happening in Europe at the same time. Real quick, I want to talk very, very briefly about your week 4 assignment. I will put more on this for week 4. But your week 4 assignment, not week 3, excuse me, your week 4 assignment's on sourcing, but it's connected to your week 7 assignment. So this is the week to really start thinking about what problem, what technological and scientific problem do you want to work on as a potential proposal in terms of funding, in terms of what can be done locally, what can be done nationally, what can be done on a global scale, or somewhere in between those places. In terms of you want to solve a problem, like create a new electrical grid for Silver Spring, for instance, or you want to do better paved roads or whatever. You want to figure out what the it is that has a scientific and technological connection. And while the assignment rubric talks about using your imagination, don't get too wild with it. You want to have something that you can actually look up and have sources for that are credible, right? You might want to do faster than light drive, right? But it doesn't really exist, right? We create those things through science fiction. It's possible to do that if you understand Einstein's theory of relativity and all of his equations about converting matter and energy and into energy and then energy back into matter, then maybe you could create a faster than light drive or a warp drive or whatnot. But it's not a realistic problem to deal with in this course. You want to pick something that piques the imagination, but is balanced by a little bit of realism at the same time. So that's what you want to work through before going to do your sourcing assignment and trying to find credible sources through UMC Library, not through UMC Library, web pages of websites that really deal with whatever problem or issue that you are that you want to work on for your week 7 assignment. That's what your week 4 assignment really is all about. And you do have to pick what style you're going to use for that assignment in terms of citation, whether it be Chicago style, APA, MLA. They've left this open so that, and I say they because I'm not the one picking your style. You pick the style that you want to use, that you're most comfortable with in terms of citation methodology and references, and that will be okay. So that's it for week 3. I will talk to you in video again pretty soon.